My name is Rune Rasmussen, and I'm with Transparency International here in Brussels. One of the largest NGOs dealing with anti-corruption in the world, with a presence in 99 countries. And we're a non-political organization, and more importantly, we're a non-investigative organization. So we don't actually go after individual cases of corruption. So whenever people ask, so what are you going to do about the corruption cases in the European Union? We don't do very much about them. Basically, there's the police, there's Olaf, there's others to look into this. We believe that corruption is in systems and not only in individuals. That if you have a system that is prone to corruption, for instance, until recently, some policemen in Mexico was not even paid. So it was simply acknowledged that they would get their salaries from bribes, which means you would have to change the system, not simply the individual policeman. So I will focus more on the systematic changes rather than individuals in my presentation. Right. Now the question to me and to the forum here was, which reforms are needed to make the EU more transparent? And I think that it's important to look at different kinds of transparency. The transparency that we promote is as a means to fight corruption, in a sense. It's and not necessarily to promote democracy. I mean, we're of course TIs, as everybody else, a strong believer of democracy, of course. But it's primarily to promote the work of anti-corruption. Luckily, though, there are a number of issues of transparency works for both. As we just heard, with the lobby rules, they're a prerequisite for democracy, I would say, or at least an important part of democracy. They're also a very important part to disclose corrupt action, for instance. You have whistleblower rules, and generally access to information, for instance, can be used to promote democracy, but also to promote anti-corruption. I will, however, take a look at the last points of the program that you have, where transparency promotes democracy, with two examples. I'll keep it very short, but we work on those, so I'm very happy to see it in the EUDebates program. The first one is that of a blacklisting database that is mentioned here, where the idea is in short that if a company has been accused of corruption previously during public tenders, they will be excluded from tenders in the future, for instance, depending on how serious it is, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years. And so the idea is that if somebody if a company is caught in this, they will simply be put on the list, and they will simply be excluded. We believe that rather than, it's of course a sanction, but it's also a very efficient deterrent for not paying the bribes in the first place. Because if you risk losing not only this order, but also the next orders, you might think twice before you do it. The good news is, again, it's the good news, that the EU has actually implemented a system of blacklisting, of EU-wide blacklisting last year, in December. Next slide, thanks. So the idea is that even budget funds managed either by the Commission or by the member states are now part of this system. So that if a company bribes for an official in Sweden, for instance, they will be excluded from public contracts, also in Germany, for instance. The bad news is that the EU has absolutely no procedures and no rules for establishing the situation there. How long should a company be on the list? For what exactly? So there are no rules in that sense. So to get back to the question, one example of a change that we would like to see is that you have some kind of common approach to for instance, to blacklisting, but also to other forms of relevant criminal law in this sense. And the next one is the anti-corruption criteria in accession. As we all know, the EU has a very strong leverage when pushing candidates and potential candidate countries to reform. That they can ask for really a lot of things, and at the moment they even push their candidates for countries to implement so-called soft acquis, so also to implement conventions from the Council of Europe, for instance, in which they really have little leverage in practice, but they use this kind of powers to push for the implementation. There are two problems, however. One of them is that the EU is primarily strong on the legal and the institutional side of things. They're very good in changing the laws of the future member states. I'll bet that Romania now has a better disclosure of access law than Sweden has, for instance. But the problem is its proper implementation. The second problem is that after accession, EU completely loses all its powers, as you're all very aware. So from having a lot of powers to implement change, on the day of accession, they completely lose this. I'm aware that this applies to basically all of the acquis, but with the anti-corruption acquis, it's particularly problematic because some of those in charge of actually changing the laws and implementing the laws are also benefiting from, or potentially benefiting from the corruption that is happening. For instance, in Serbia, For instance, in Serbia, it was just a study shows there's a high level of so-called state capture, where organized groups have, to a very large extent, infiltrated the political life there. So if you have an organized group who are kind of using the state to actually get the money out of the public system, it's a bit. If you just leave reform to that system, it's simply not going to change. So another suggestion, a very concrete suggestion for reform, would simply be a much more, a system where you don't go from having maximum pressure to having zero pressure. That you, for instance, have a monitoring period, or for new member states, but even better for older member states, that you continuously monitor the implementation and the implementation of anti-corruption laws also in the older member states. I'll leave it there.